Today we are going to jump right into this one. I'll be making a new zero clearance throat plate for my table saw using this 1/2 inch thick acrylic. While I am getting set up with the track saw, why don't you take a split second and click that subscribe button. It's absolutely free to subscribe and it only takes a second. If you like the video after watching it, go ahead and hit that like button as well. There are some issues with cutting acrylic and I'll point those out during this video. So if you'd like to make one of this material for yourself, you may want to stick around. One of the issues is the melting. When cutting this with a track saw, it would melt and build up, causing some binding of the blade. So I use the table saw to clean up those edges. It seems to cut better and cleaner when you're just slightly cutting the edges. I used a throat plate I had made before out of MDF as a template. I just laid it on top of the acrylic and traced all the way around it. This gives me a line to go by when I'm cutting a lot of this excess off at the bandsaw. Notice here on this first cut how I'm having to use some force to get the piece to go through the blade. That's because of the melting buildup on the bottom side of this. This material is melting and re-welding itself to the piece down in the insert of the bandsaw. Notice that cut off in the piece that comes out of the insert. That is why I had to use force, and that was totally my fault. When cutting this material, you have to keep a constant feed rate, and it has to be fast enough that the buildup passes by anything that it can hang on before it resets itself. You will be able to really see it good in a minute at the router table. Also, when cutting it, you will want to keep it flat on the work surface until it cools, such as the cast iron surface of your saw. This only takes a second due to the metal pulling the heat back out of the material. Raising it off the work surface before it cools causes the melted debris, what is normally saw does, causes it to bend down as the piece is lifted. By the time you've lifted the piece and laid it back down, it may not be laying flat where this debris is holding it up. You may have to use a putty knife or your hand or something to break those small pieces free so it will lay down flat again. I used some double-sided tape and placed my old MDF throat plate as a template on the piece. Using a flush trim bit, I cut my piece out. Right here you can see how this stuff melts and re-welds back to the piece. But with a router it's easy to clean it up, not so much with the bandsaw or the track saw or anything else. After shaping this, I made one more quick pass all the way around just to make sure I had everything cleaned up. Right here I made a mistake. A small mistake, but still a mistake. I removed the template prior to drilling my finger hole. So now I'm just holding the template on top and drilling through it to mark my spot. Now this hole doesn't have to be in the exact same spot. It was just where I am used to it, and that's where I wanted it. You can place yours wherever you want. And I put a small round over on each side of the finger hole just to remove the sharp edges. I removed my 10-inch blade from the saw and put a 7 1/4 inch blade in. This will allow my throat plate to sit all the way down in the saw. It does sit slightly above the saw top. I didn't measure it, but I'm guessing it's around 1/16 of an inch. Placing my fence over the top to hold it down, I went ahead and made that initial cut. Then I put the 10-inch blade back in the saw and made the final cut. And if your ruler on your saw is correct, you can use that to set your fence from the blade and not raise your blade up into your fence. Just make sure that your ruler on your fence is correct. Now I need to address these locations on the throat plate and get it setting level with the saw top. And I'll do this at the drill press, but first let's mark these locations. I'll mark the stop and the start of each location on the side of the throat plate. If you know the name of these stops, rest, cleats, or whatever they are called, leave that in the comments below so we'll all know. But for the sake of this video, I'll just call them cleats. Next, I'll cover each one with blue painter's tape and cut the shape out. The cleat at the front is in a curve, so I'll stick the edge of the tape on the saw top and cut that shape. And then I'll move it down to the cleat itself and cut it out. Now that all 5 are done, I'll start removing them one by one, placing them on the plate using my marks that I made earlier to line them up. Be sure to place them on the bottom side of the plate and keep them oriented as to which location that they go, just in case yours are not all the same size or directly across from each other. You may have some that are staggered. I selected a Forstner bit that was slightly larger than the cleats. I would rotate the bit by hand to make sure that I was covering the entire piece of tape. Then I would drill down just a little bit deeper than what I actually needed. Now it sits lower than the top, which is exactly what I wanted. Then I wax each cleat to ensure that I do not permanently stick this insert into the saw. Using some double-sided tape again, I'll stick 2 flat boards on the top side of the insert. Then I'll place a good amount of hot glue on top of each cleat, doing this fast enough that the glue doesn't harden before I can set the insert back down inside the top of the saw. Once the glue is hardened, you can remove the insert, pull the wooden strips off, and now it's level and ready to use.